Canada is moving into nuclear power in a way that could affect your energy bills, your jobs, and North America's place in the world. The United States still looks like the giant in this race, but Canada now has uranium, reactors, and a plan to sell nuclear power expertise abroad. The question is not whether Washington is panicking. The question is whether Canada is quietly building leverage that Americans and Canadians will both have to deal with. Because this is not just about one reactor in Ontario. It is about who controls the fuel, the technology, and the supply chain behind the next generation of power. The center of this story is Darlington, a nuclear site on the north shore of Lake Ontario, east of Toronto. That name may not sound dramatic. It does not sound like Wall Street. It does not sound like a battlefield. It does not sound like a crisis room in Washington. But Darlington may become one of the most important energy construction sites in North America. Ontario Power Generation is moving ahead with a small modular reactor project at Darlington using the GE Hitachi BWRX-300 design. On April 4, 2025, Canada's nuclear regulator authorized OPG to construct one BWRX-300 reactor at the Darlington New Nuclear Project site in Clarington, Ontario. That is the confirmed milestone. Not a rumor, not campaign talk, not social media drama. A construction license. And in the nuclear world, that matters. A construction license means years of safety review, engineering work, public hearings, regulatory questions, and political risk have moved from discussion into execution. Canada did not simply announce a dream. It cleared a major gate. The first unit is planned to generate about 300 megawatts of power. OPG says the goal is to connect that first unit to the grid by the end of 2030. The wider plan is 4 units at Darlington, for a total of 1,200 megawatts, enough electricity for roughly 1.2 million homes if the full project is completed. The total price tag often cited for all 4 units is around 20.9 billion Canadian dollars. That is why this story is bigger than one local energy project. A 300 megawatt reactor may sound small compared with the huge nuclear plants built in the last century, but that is the point. Small modular reactors are meant to change the model. They are designed to be smaller, more repeatable, easier to finance in stages, and easier to export than massive traditional nuclear plants. That does not mean they are easy. Nothing about nuclear is easy. But if Darlington works, Canada gets more than a new source of electricity. Canada gets a reference project. And in global energy, a reference project is proof. It lets Canada say to other countries, we did not just talk about this reactor. We licensed it. We built it. We connected it. We know what went wrong. We know what worked. We can help you do it too. That is the quiet power move here. Some competitors frame this story as Canada suddenly alarming Washington and challenging US nuclear dominance. That makes for a dramatic headline, but it goes too far. There is no solid public evidence that Washington is in panic over Darlington. There is evidence of attention. There is evidence of competition. There is evidence of supply chain concern. There is evidence that nuclear energy is becoming strategic again. But panic is not proven. The real story is more serious than panic. Canada is trying to turn nuclear energy into a national strategy. Not just a climate tool, not just an Ontario power project, not just a science experiment, a strategic export industry. And that shift matters because the world has changed. Electricity demand is rising. Artificial intelligence data centers need huge amounts of reliable power. Factories need more electricity. Electric vehicles need charging. Heavy industry wants cleaner energy. Governments want lower emissions without blackouts. And after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Western countries became much more sensitive to who controls energy supply chains. For decades, energy security mostly meant oil and gas. Who controls the pipeline? Who controls the tanker route? Who controls the refinery? Who can cut off supply in a crisis? Now that same question is moving into nuclear. Who mines the uranium? Who converts it? Who enriches it? Who builds the reactor? Who services it? Who trains the workers? Who supplies the spare parts? Who has a regulator other countries trust? Canada already has several parts of that puzzle. Ottawa says nuclear power provides about 13% of Canada's electricity through 17 CANDU reactors. Canada's nuclear sector contributes about 22 billion Canadian dollars a year to the economy. And on uranium, Canada is not a minor player. It produced roughly 24% of global uranium output in 2024, with much of that strength tied to mining in Saskatchewan. That means Canada is not starting from zero. It already supplies the raw material for nuclear power around the world. It already has a working domestic reactor fleet. It already has nuclear engineers, operators, miners, regulators, and supply chain companies. It already has a reputation built around CANDU technology and peaceful nuclear use. What it has not always had is a clear national push to connect those pieces into one strategic machine. That is what now appears to be changing. Darlington is the centerpiece. Darlington is not just a plant, it is the showroom. It is the place where Canada can prove whether it can build a first-of-a-kind commercial SMR, keep the schedule under control, manage the cost, satisfy the regulator, and then repeat the model. And repetition is everything. One reactor is a project. 4 reactors become a program. A program becomes an industry becomes leverage. That leverage can mean jobs in Ontario, uranium revenue in Saskatchewan, engineering contracts across Canada, and long-term service deals abroad. It can also mean political influence. If allies need secure uranium, trusted nuclear partners, and non-Russian supply chains, Canada suddenly has something much more valuable than a slogan. It has product. And this is where the US audience needs to pay attention. America wants a nuclear comeback. It needs reliable power for data centers, manufacturing, military facilities, homes, electric vehicles, and heavy industry. Politicians in both parties talk about energy security, but energy security does not happen just because someone says the words. It requires fuel, it requires technology, it requires workers, it requires permits, it requires money, it requires trust. And if the United States wants to build faster, it will need allies with real assets. Canada wants to be one of those allies. That does not make Canada a replacement for the United States. It makes Canada harder to ignore. This situation is moving faster than most people realize. By the time mainstream coverage catches the full picture, the key decisions may already be made. So subscribe to stay ahead of the story instead of catching up after the consequences are locked in. Now look at Ottawa's timing. In April 2026, Canada committed to a new nuclear energy strategy. The plan focuses on protecting the existing nuclear fleet, supporting new builds, expanding fuel opportunities, exporting Canadian nuclear services, and investing in next-generation reactors. That list tells you the direction. Keep what already works, build more, use uranium strength, sell expertise abroad, push advanced nuclear technology. That is not the language of a country treating nuclear as a side issue. That is the language of a country trying to move up the value chain. And that phrase matters. Selling raw uranium is valuable, but selling uranium, reactor expertise, engineering, fuel services, training, safety support, and long-term maintenance is far more valuable. The deeper a country moves into the nuclear value chain, the more influence it gains. This is why Saskatchewan matters as much as Ontario. Ontario gets the reactor headlines. Saskatchewan holds much of the uranium story. Canadian uranium is not just another mineral. It is a strategic resource in a world where countries want to reduce dependence on unstable or hostile suppliers. After Russia invaded Ukraine, Western governments began looking at uranium, conversion, enrichment, and nuclear fuel with new urgency. Before the war, many people saw nuclear fuel as a technical issue. After the war, it became a security issue. Cameco, based in Saskatchewan, sits at the center of this shift. Cameco has a major agreement to supply Ukraine's Energoatom with uranium hexafluoride needs for 9 Ukrainian reactors from 2024 through 2035. That is not just a business deal. It shows how Canadian nuclear fuel can become part of a larger geopolitical strategy. Ukraine wants to reduce dependence connected to Russia. Western allies want Ukraine's energy system to survive pressure from war. Canadian uranium and conversion services become part of that wider struggle. Then there is Westinghouse. This part of the story is often exaggerated, so it needs to be said clearly. Canada does not control Westinghouse as a state actor. The Canadian government does not directly own it, but Canadian companies are deeply involved. Cameco owns 49% of Westinghouse, while Brookfield holds 51%. That is a major Canadian corporate stake in one of the most important nuclear technology companies in the world. But it is not the same as Ottawa controlling Westinghouse like a government department. The real point is more subtle. Canadian capital and Canadian nuclear interests are now tied into the global nuclear revival. And that creates an interesting situation for the United States. America wants more nuclear power. It wants secure fuel. It wants domestic manufacturing. It wants energy independence. It wants to reduce dependence on Russia and China. But the American nuclear revival is not purely American. It touches Canadian uranium. It touches Canadian investors. It touches allied technology. It touches global supply chains. That is not weakness. That is the reality of modern nuclear power. Nuclear energy is no longer just a national project. It is a network, and countries that hold strong positions inside that network will have more influence than countries that only make speeches about independence. For American viewers, this is the practical issue. Your grid is under pressure. Your factories need power. Your data centers need power. Your politicians are promising reshoring, AI leadership, electric vehicles, and energy dominance at the same time. All of those goals require electricity, not just more electricity, reliable electricity. Solar and wind can help, natural gas can help, hydro can help in the right places, batteries can help balance the grid, but nuclear is attractive because it can provide steady power around the clock. That is why nuclear is back in the political conversation. But if the United States wants to build fast, it needs a secure supply chain. That is where Canada matters. The US angle is not that Washington is secretly terrified of Ontario. The US angle is vulnerability. If America wants a huge nuclear build-out, it cannot rely on fragile fuel routes, scarce enrichment capacity, slow permitting, limited component supply, and uncertain allied coordination forever. It needs reliable partners. Canada is trying to become one of the partners that cannot be bypassed. That is leverage. And leverage works quietly. It does not always look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like a uranium mine in Saskatchewan. Sometimes it looks like a construction license in Ontario. Sometimes it looks like a fuel agreement with Ukraine. Sometimes it looks like a Canadian company owning nearly half of Westinghouse. Each piece alone looks technical. Together, they form strategy. For Canadian viewers, the story is about sovereignty in a practical sense. Canada has spent years trying to stay relevant in a world dominated by the United States, China, Europe, and rising middle powers. It has resources, it has energy, it has talent. But too often, Canada exports raw materials and buys back higher value products. The nuclear push is a chance to do something different. If Canada can mine uranium, process it, build reactor expertise, license SMRs, export services, and support allies, then nuclear becomes more than electricity. It becomes industrial policy. It becomes foreign policy. It becomes a job strategy. It becomes bargaining power. But none of this is guaranteed. The Darlington SMR still has to be built. Costs matter, timelines matter, public trust matters, safety matters, waste management matters, indigenous consultation matters, regulation matters. Nuclear projects can go wrong in expensive ways. Anyone pretending nuclear is simple is not being honest. But anyone pretending Canada's move is minor is also missing the point. Canada's strongest advantage is that its nuclear story is not built from nothing. It has uranium. It has can-do experience. It has Ontario's nuclear fleet. It has a skilled workforce. It has Cameco. It has Brookfield. It has Darlington. It has a regulator that can move carefully but still approve real projects. Now Ottawa is trying to stitch those pieces together, but one missing piece could limit how much power Canada really has. That missing piece is enrichment. Traditional can-do reactors use natural uranium. That has long been one of Canada's big nuclear strengths. Can-do technology does not need enriched uranium in the same way many light water reactors do. But many modern SMR designs are different. Many need enriched uranium. Some advanced reactors may need special enriched fuel. Canada produces uranium. Canada refines and converts uranium. But Canada does not currently have full domestic enrichment capability. That changes the story. Because if Canada wants to be a complete nuclear fuel power, not just a uranium supplier, it has to decide whether it wants to move deeper into the fuel cycle. And enrichment is not just business. It is sensitive. It raises non-proliferation concerns. It requires major investment. It needs strict safeguards. It involves public trust. It can create diplomatic concerns if handled badly, but it can also create enormous strategic value if handled responsibly. This is the real dilemma. If Canada expands uranium production but still relies on others for enrichment, it gains power but not full control. If Canada moves toward domestic enrichment, it gains more leverage, but also more risk and more scrutiny. If Canada does nothing, other countries may capture the most valuable parts of the nuclear fuel chain. This is the part many people miss. The reactor gets the headline. The fuel decides the leverage. So here's the question. Should Canada move deeper into the nuclear fuel cycle? Or is that too risky? And for Americans watching, should the United States see Canada as a nuclear partner to strengthen or a competitor to watch more closely? Those questions matter because both countries need each other more than their politics often admits. Canada needs capital, technology partnerships, export markets, and stable relations with Washington. The United States needs reliable uranium, trusted allies, fuel security, and partners that can help reduce dependence on Russian-linked nuclear supply chains. The old North American energy model was simple. Canada sent oil, gas, uranium, and electricity south. The United States was the giant market. Washington set much of the tone. Canada adjusted. The new model is more complicated. If electricity demand keeps rising, if SMRs become export products, if uranium becomes more strategic, and if Western countries keep trying to break dependence on Russia and China, Canada's position changes. Canada becomes not just a supplier, but a gatekeeper in certain parts of the system. Not the only gatekeeper, not the dominant global nuclear power, but a serious player. And serious players get courted. They also get pressured. That is why this story has a global angle. Europe wants energy security. Eastern Europe wants alternatives to Russian nuclear fuel and technology. Ukraine needs fuel while fighting a war. The Middle East is investing in clean power. Asian economies are trying to balance demand, emissions, and security. Developing countries want reliable electricity without being trapped in dependence. In that world, nuclear exports are not just about reactors. They are about influence. When a country buys a reactor, it enters a relationship that can last decades. It needs fuel, it needs training, it needs maintenance, it needs safety updates, it needs waste planning, it needs emergency systems, it needs spare parts. A reactor sale is not like selling wheat. It is not even like selling a plane. It is a long-term bond between governments, companies, regulators, and fuel suppliers. Canada wants a bigger role in those bonds. Darlington gives Canada a chance to say, we have a working model. We can build small reactors. We can train your people. We can support remote communities, industrial sites, mines, data centers, and grids that need reliable, low-carbon power. That pitch will appeal to some countries. But Canada will not be alone. The United States wants nuclear exports. France wants nuclear exports. South Korea wants nuclear exports. Russia has used nuclear exports as foreign policy for years. China wants to expand its reach. The United Kingdom is working on its own nuclear future. So Canada is entering a crowded race. Its advantage is uranium and credibility. Its disadvantage is scale. The United States has much larger capital markets. China can move with state-backed speed. Russia has experience packaging finance, fuel, and construction. South Korea has a strong record building abroad. France has deep nuclear history. Canada has to prove that smaller size is not weakness. Darlington is the test. If the first BWRX-300 reaches the grid near the planned timeline, and if costs stay credible, Canada's export argument becomes stronger. If the project suffers major delays or overruns, critics will say SMRs are still more promise than proof. That is the honest uncertainty. Nuclear construction has a long history of optimism meeting reality. Permits do not build reactors. Announcements do not pour concrete. Political speeches do not train welders. A cost estimate is not the same thing as a final bill. Canada's opportunity is real. So is the risk. For Ottawa, nuclear energy offers a rare bridge between several goals. It can be sold as climate policy because nuclear power produces electricity without direct carbon emissions. It can be sold as industrial policy because it supports skilled jobs. It can be sold as security policy because it strengthens allied supply chains. It can be sold as regional policy because Ontario, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and other provinces may all have a stake. But that bridge can also become a battleground. Some environmental groups oppose nuclear because of waste, cost, accident risk, and long build times. Some fiscal conservatives worry about public money backing expensive projects. Some communities worry about local impact. Some indigenous groups may raise concerns about mining, land, consultation, and long-term stewardship. Those concerns cannot be brushed aside. A credible nuclear strategy has to answer them. It has to show where nuclear makes sense, how costs will be controlled, how waste will be managed, how communities will be consulted, and how safety will remain non-negotiable. Supporters will say nuclear is one of the few tools that can provide reliable, large-scale, low-carbon electricity while supporting domestic industry. Critics will say nuclear projects are too expensive, too slow, and too dependent on public support. Both sides will find evidence. The question is not whether nuclear is perfect. It is not. The question is whether Canada can build a nuclear role strong enough to justify the cost, risk, and political attention. Right now, Ottawa appears to believe the answer is yes. And there is another reason for that: electricity demand. Canada is planning for a much larger grid in the coming decades. That demand is tied to industrial growth, AI data centers, electric vehicles, cleaner manufacturing, and energy security. Nuclear strategy cannot be separated from grid strategy. A reactor does not matter if the power cannot move. A clean energy plan fails if the grid cannot handle demand. A data center boom becomes a political problem if families see higher bills or communities face reliability issues. For the US and Canada, electricity is becoming a national competitiveness issue. Countries that can produce reliable power at scale will attract factories, data centers, mines, and advanced manufacturing. Countries that cannot will lose investment. That is why nuclear is back. Not because politicians suddenly became reactor experts, because the old grid math changed. AI changed it. Electrification changed it. Climate targets changed it. War changed it. Supply chains changed it. And once electricity becomes the bottleneck, every reliable source of power becomes strategic. That is the world Canada is trying to enter with more confidence. But ambition is not dominance. Canada's nuclear push does not mean it is about to dethrone the United States. It does not mean Washington is powerless. It does not mean Canada controls global nuclear energy. It does not mean Darlington alone changes everything. What it means is more subtle. Canada has noticed that nuclear power is no longer a sleepy legacy industry. It has noticed that uranium is no longer just a commodity. It has noticed that SMRs could become a major export market if one country proves the model first. It has noticed that allies need secure energy supply chains. It has noticed that the United States wants a nuclear revival but cannot do everything alone. And now Canada is moving. Not perfectly, not without risk, not without gaps, but moving. The biggest mistake is to look only at the reactor. The reactor is the symbol. The system is the story. The system includes Saskatchewan uranium, it includes Ontario reactors, it includes Darlington's license, it includes Ottawa's national strategy, it includes Cameco's role in Ukraine, it includes Westinghouse ownership, it includes US nuclear revival plans, it includes Canada's enrichment gap, it includes global demand for clean, reliable power. Once you see the system, the story changes. This is not simply Canada scares Washington. This is Canada trying to become unavoidable. And in geopolitics, becoming unavoidable is often more valuable than making noise. The United States can ignore a speech. It cannot ignore a trusted fuel supplier. It can dismiss a headline. It cannot dismiss a proven reactor project. It can argue with an ally. It cannot easily replace a secure supply chain in the middle of an energy build-out. That is the quiet power Canada is chasing. For American workers, this could mean more competition in nuclear services, but also more projects if North American supply chains grow together. For Canadian workers, it could mean high-paying jobs in mining, engineering, construction, operations, and export services. For families, it could affect long-term electricity reliability and cost. For investors, it creates opportunity but also risk, because nuclear timelines can punish overconfidence. For governments, it becomes a test of whether they can turn strategy into delivery. And for rivals like Russia and China, a stronger Canadian nuclear sector creates another Western option in a market they would prefer to shape themselves. That is why the stakes are not small. A country that can offer uranium, reactor experience, peaceful credentials, and proven SMR deployment can help allies avoid dependence on authoritarian suppliers. But only if it can execute. Execution is the whole game. Canada has made the announcement. Darlington has cleared major regulatory ground. Ottawa has pointed toward a national nuclear strategy. Companies like Cameco and Brookfield are tied into the global nuclear revival. Saskatchewan remains central to uranium. Ontario is trying to prove the SMR model. Now comes the harder part. Building. Because the world does not reward nuclear plans. It rewards nuclear power that turns on, runs safely, and delivers electricity at a price people can live with. That is where the next few years become decisive. If Darlington's first unit connects to the grid by the end of 2030, Canada will have something very few countries can claim: a working commercial SMR reference point in a democratic market with a respected regulator. If the full 4-unit plan moves forward, Canada's export case becomes stronger. If Ottawa also figures out the fuel question, Canada's leverage grows again. But if costs climb, timelines slip, or public trust cracks, the story changes. Then critics will say Canada tried to sell the world a future it had not yet mastered. That is the tension. And that is why the panic framing misses the deeper truth. Washington does not need to panic for this to matter. Washington only needs to notice that Canada is no longer acting like a passive energy supplier. Canada is acting like a country that wants a seat at the nuclear table before the seats are gone. If you believe the US and Canada deserve honest, clear coverage, not spun headlines, not fake crisis language, and not corporate talking points, this channel was built for you. Subscribe and stand with every viewer who refuses to look away from what is really happening when the real power shift is hidden inside policies, permits, fuel contracts, and construction timelines. So here's the story in one line. Canada is not suddenly dominating nuclear power, but it is building the pieces of a serious nuclear strategy at the exact moment the world needs reliable electricity, secure uranium, and trusted reactor partners. The next question is whether Canada can solve the fuel sovereignty problem before the next wave of SMR demand arrives. Because the country that controls the reactor matters, but the country that controls the fuel may hold the stronger hand. In my next video, I'm covering the nuclear fuel race between Canada, the United States, and Russia, and what I found will change how you see this.